all the equipment that I see now the Taliban put on parade. I remember the Afghan army, the Afghan National Defense Forces, having that equipment. Two administrations made the decision, this is no longer in our vital national interest, to keep a U.S. capability there in Afghanistan.
Why did we leave?
When we first went in after 9/11, it was very clear within our policymakers, this is a vital national interest. How do we tap down at that time Al-Qaeda? How do we break the safe haven that Al-Qaeda had with the Taliban in Afghanistan? The cradle there of bin Laden, and then he later fled over to Pakistan. And the country was united, the policymakers were united, we were very clear. When we got to 2021, the administration had made a different change, and it decided, hey, this is no longer a vital national interest. Now, what was the military advice? We were down at that point, by the time we left, to about 3,000 American soldiers. NATO forces had outnumbered us at that point in time. Even with the national caveats that they had, were they doing as many direct combat operations as we were? No, but they were providing a lot of the backbone of the support that we did. But two administrations made the decision, this is no longer in our vital national interest, to keep a U.S. footprint and a U.S. capability there in Afghanistan. Do I agree with that decision? Yep. I think it was a pretty low cost to keep an eye on Al-Qaeda, and also, the offshoots that are as dangerous or more dangerous there, with the Islamic State, with ISIS-K. So with the Khorasan there, but they made that decision. I know that we, as the military leaders, the bosses that I worked for, certainly expressed, hey, this is the cost and benefit of going. But both administrations were adamant that we were going to leave. And Fran, it was tough, and it was tough for all of us to see that, because of the long partnerships that we'd had with our Afghan partners. And, how do we get them out of there? That was another sense of urgency from our part. We need to start identifying moving them now. And there was a large discussion on, well, does that show a sign of weakness, or should, what can we do and how quick should we move it? But it was very difficult. And yeah, as the guy that, all the equipment that I see now the Taliban put on parade, I remember the Afghan army, the Afghan National Defense Forces, having that equipment. And when the collapse came and the Taliban seized what we could not destroy or get out of country, that was really painful to watch, and really painful to watch our partners that are, some of them, still stuck in Afghanistan.
When we look at our partners in Afghanistan, one of the primary missions of special forces, I'm talking Green Berets, Army Special Forces, is to partner with foreign armies, subsets of militaries, train, equip them. And that word partner is the most important one, because we go to war with them. We enable them to go and conduct operations on our behalf in so many ways. And that relationship's built on trust.
Right.
And we've seen several times over in American history where people will use the term abandon our partners. We've heard that over the last couple of years. What are the Afghan partners that were left there? How do they feel?
Well, I'm sure there was a sense of, first there was a sense of unbelief. You're not really leaving. You're not really going to leave us. And then it was, we are. Those decisions have been made that we are actually going to leave. And I think it was almost a sense of disbelief that came into a grudging set of, they really are leaving reality. And, the ones that are still there, the ones that we should have got out, well, yeah, that's kind of shame on us. And we should still be doing, and I know there's a lot of great organizations out there, and I know you interviewed Scott Mann not too long ago, and the great work they have done to get those people out. And we all had a different hand, from, I was in Europe by that time, and, burning up phone lines. How do we get people out? And, that effort still continues to this day with a lot of folks. But certainly there was a sense on their part. Now, conversely, look at all we did provide to the Afghan National Security Forces. And in some ways, what I have sometimes a hard time reckoning in my mind is when we got to Afghanistan, when, the first horse soldiers and when they all came in, we had fighters that were taking on armored formations in the back of, back of Hiluxes with small arms. Somewhere along the line in our training with them, and I'm not talking specifically within the soft community, but the broader community of how we provided capability to them, we ended up with a force that was reluctant and reticent to leave a secure position to go conduct an operation without outrageous amounts of air support. And not always necessarily within the soft formations, but the normal Army soldiers, it was very difficult to get them to move. So how did we get from the warrior spirit of guys fighting on horseback in the back of Hiluxes to a force that was a little bit reticent? And I think we have to look on how did we empower them, and how did we enable them? And, you want to give your partner everything you possibly can, but they also have to have the impetus to go out forward and fight. And that was tough. And, the war had drug on for 20 years. So there was obviously, and they had lost far more soldiers than we did. And our losses were great. And, and on Veterans Day, we remember all the veterans that served in all wars, but, in Afghanistan as we're having this discussion. But they were also worn out and tired. And we're not as eager sometimes to continue on. And then, you've always got the specter of corruption within Afghanistan that made it hard for the individual soldiers. What am I fighting for? Am I willing? And how do you imbue that within them? So it was a difficult set of circumstances. But we super empowered them in a lot of ways. And when we left, I think we were all very concerned, if not, in some ways resigned that parts were going to fail. Now, did we know it was going to fail in that rapidly? No, that was surprising.
What's the effect on the U.S. special operators? I mean, U.S. forces writ large. I mean, of all service components who serve there, but we talk about Green Berets primarily on this show. But what is the effect? I mean, you said we have talked to Scott and we've talked to a number of other folks who've been intimately involved in this, and I think there's a range of emotions.
Yeah, Green Berets, first and foremost, they need to be really proud of their service, and they need to be really proud of what they did when the Twin Towers went down. And when we had the horrific attacks in 9/11, that was centered out of Afghanistan. And we went into Afghanistan, and the Special Operations Forces went into Afghanistan, and the U.S. Army and our NATO allies under, Article 5, only time it's ever been enacted, went into Afghanistan, and Al-Qaeda was rendered incapable of doing external operations or planning operations from a safe haven to affect our homeland, or the homeland of our allies in many ways. Now, did they lose all capability? No. But, they were really tamped down. And so from that aspect, we need to be proud of the service that we did. But, yeah, it is tough. When you fought with guys, when you have been to Arlington and you have buried your friends and you have rendered the military honors, to suddenly leave. And that is a difficult pill to swallow. But my overall point to all those that served and all the Green Berets that served in Afghanistan, be proud of your service. You answered the call after Al-Qaeda attacked our homeland and rendered it impossible for them to do that for the last 20 years.
Let's talk about Afghanistan today.
Okay.
So reports are out there, some confirmed, some unconfirmed, but the consensus is that the U.S. has sent about $3 billion in cash to the Taliban since we left in August of 2021, so 3 years. It's about $80 million a month. You talked about the equipment that we left there, billions of dollars. There reports out of Afghanistan from people we know are saying that the Taliban and Al-Qaeda have lashed back up, that they are working together. We have reports that Hamza bin Laden is in charge, the son of Osama bin Laden, and that Afghanistan is once again becoming that terrorist center of training and operations in the world, and that their top priority is revenge on the U.S. The 9/11 Commission estimates that 9/11 cost about $500,000. I gave you the numbers on what we estimate is being spent into Afghanistan, being put in there right now to people who want to kill us. are we paying the Taliban and Al-Qaeda not to attack us? And what happens if that dries up?
Well, I hope not. And I'm not familiar with all the payments. You gave me a lot of facts and figures that I'm not, as familiar with. I think we were naive, although it was in the agreement signed between the U.S. that Al-Qaeda and Taliban would not provide each other support, that they would break. But they are so ingrained from a philosophical and an ideological position that, I think it was a bit naive if we really thought they were going to completely break off. Now, they could hide it and, act like they weren't doing it for a certain period of time, but they are brothers and they are linked. And now, they're linked against ISIS-K, which is their mortal enemy. They're the other terrorist affiliate that they really don't like, which has a sticky ideology. So I hope we're not paying them not to attack us. And again, it gets back to that decision. Was it a vital national interest of the U.S.? A lot of us in the military and me said, sure, for that terrorist safe haven, for a small footprint that is really reinforced by our allies, is the cost at which we could have even driven down lower, is the cost worth it? And I think it was. I'm sorry that we made the decisions we did, but we followed the decisions that were given to us that we had to follow.
I think even when you think about Afghanistan, and everybody knows, when we look at Afghanistan and think about it over history, it's been a quagmire for the Soviets. Okay, we've talked about our 20 years there, and everyone who seems to go to this landlocked country, the most difficult terrain on earth, when you talk about the mountainous regions, everyone kind of gets stuck there. But it is a critical location within that region of the world because it does sit between Pakistan, it sits between Iran, and it creates almost a check on Iran. And when we look at the situation in the Middle East, and we'll talk about that here in a second, we had them surrounded in many ways, and we've kind of pulled away from there. Does that then allow Iran, as we've seen over the last couple of years, to be propped up a little bit?
Well, I think, let's broaden that out. Let's broaden that discussion beyond Afghanistan. Let's look at all of the nations that are there, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan. Let's look at, all of the stands that are in that part of the world. They all live in a really rough neighborhood, borders with China, borders with Iran, borders with Russia, and borders with Afghanistan. So how do we work to develop the right relationships, the right military partnerships, the right help for those nations also to stand up? And, and that can be done, at a fairly efficient cost. But I think you're right. That's important, that we want to have a footprint and a strong partnership in those parts of the world. And, get them into at least the same technological space and understanding that we have within our military. And then, there's certainly a big role for the State Department there in building those bridges as well. Yeah.